Call the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. And following on from my colleague, the Honourable Annette King, the question of who will provide advice if this bill is passed and we remove the ability of Housing New Zealand to do so. The question of why that advice should be provided is also one that I'll come back to. In my view, the who's, that is, if we replace Housing New Zealand or if we prevent them providing that advice, that vacuum will be filled by three parties. Firstly, the real estate agents, because the government likes them, the banks, or the investors in the whole housing market, Mr Chairman. The reality is the Minister will require advice. Capable as she is, I don't think she has the ability to go around and find out what's happening in each and every different market for housing up and down this country. So where will the advice to the Minister come from? Real estate agents, well, I guess they could provide advice, they're on the ground. The banks, they provide the money. And the investors, who obviously have an interest in this area. Well, we must, Mr Chairman, we must ask the question why they will provide the advice. Because when Housing New Zealand provides the advice, it's for one purpose, and they've been set up. And that is to help New Zealanders into housing and into homes. It's not just social housing, actually it's across. Every bit of housing, be it in the public or private sector, has a social component to it. If we think we can have an economy without people having homes, we've got our head in the sand, Mr Speaker. We live in a false world. Mr Speaker, we need a strong social structure across our society, strength, confidence and security to give us a good economy. The government, on the other hand, in removing the ability of its own agency set up right back in the 30s to provide houses and homes for New Zealanders, to provide security for our good people so they can get on and live their lives and contribute to our country and our economy, Mr Speaker. If you remove that ability for them to provide the advice, you then leave it open to the real estate agents, the banks and the investors. And their reasons for providing advice are not the same reasons of Housing New Zealand, are not the same reasons of a Labor government, but perhaps the national government has a totally different objective. And in spite of their words around social housing responsibility, in my view, they've got to the reality and the honesty of saying, we'll just leave it to the markets. We don't need any advice because the markets will provide the advice to the Minister and indicate what he or she should do. Because that's the philosophy of the current national government. The market delivers nirvana. The market delivers to each and every New Zealander. They think. And we'll get our advice from the real estate agents, and we'll get our advice from the banks and from the investors, and we'll ensure that every New Zealander has a fair go. Listen to the ad played in Singapore, Minister. Listen to the ad that says, invest in this country because New Zealanders will pay more than 50% of their incomes to pay the return on your investment. And that's the advice that the Minister's going to open her mind and ears to, because the Minister and the government is going to remove the ability of the one agency set up in the 30s to provide homes and securities for New Zealanders, remove the ability of that agency to provide the advice. Mr Speaker, this is a huge backward step. And in part two, Mr Speaker, this is an outrage for a country that has depended upon the advice, the independent advice and the sound objectives of Housing New Zealand since the 1930s. And this subclause, this part of this bill, will remove that and replace it with the market advice, with the self-serving advice of real estate agents, the self-serving advice of banks that want to pour more money in so they can get more money back, and the self-serving advice of the investors who think it is better that more and more New Zealanders pay rent into the private sector than have the security of a home, be it in this private sector or be it under Housing New Zealand. This is a disgrace, Mr. Chairman.
Call the